that the land on which Oakville sits is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. And in fact, that reminds me that the founding story of our town is that from 1827 to 1857, when the legislature finally recognized the existence of Oakville, for those 30 formative years, three groups of people who were pioneer settlers came together to create a community where everyone could work together toward the shared vision of harmony and prosperity. Those three groups were the Indigenous people of Canada, who summered and still have the right to on the mouth of the 16 and the 14 Mile Creeks, and Black residents, pioneers who had fled slavery in the United States in that period before the Civil War, and white settlers who were basically coming from all over the empire, but started with a Burlingtonian. And together, these three distinct groups of people worked in harmony for prosperity. And as you can see by looking around our town, they had some success at that goal. And our job as their inheritors is to remember that vision and to keep succeeding at it. And I think the evidence is that generation after generation, we've done that. As part of tonight's International Women's Day event, Pavan has made these really nice little masks. I'm going to hold that up so you can see it. And it's got the hashtag, the motto, choose to challenge. And speaking as the father of two daughters who never had any trouble choosing to challenge.
Especially you, hon.
Especially me. And they got good results with it. I think I can, I'm going to, in a few brief remarks, try to encourage everybody to that end. One of my most important goals is that everyone in our community be a fully included and contributing member of our community. That's how we keep our community the best community in the country. And I'd like that to happen every day, not just International Women's Day or Women's History Month. Our community is made up of many, many community groups, residents associations, sports associations, environmental associations, business associations. And here's something they all have in common. They're moms and dads who are volunteers working to make our community better. And you live, some of them are town-wide, so everyone in Oakville lives within the frame of one of these groups, if not more. And so to be included often starts with a single step, yours, which is to step forward and volunteer. And Wendy and I, when we moved to Oakville, we had three little kids, and we put our kids in these groups, and our ethic was, if your kids are in a volunteer group that the moms and dads are doing the work in, you've got a duty to pitch in. And what we discovered is there's no warmer welcome in the world than there is for willing hands when there's work to be done. And that works for everybody, no matter what race, creed, or color, or any other consideration. In Oakville, people really, really respect people who want to work. So that's how you get shoulder to shoulder with people. That's how you break down barriers. That's how you demonstrate the worth of your group. That's how you make yourself wanted. Being wanted starts with being useful and trying to help. So as long as we participate together, we will continue to have the best community in the world to grow in and to live in and to retire and play in. And I hope that you'll pitch in and continue to make Oakville's story one of increasing harmony and prosperity. And Councillor Parmer, I'd like to give you the honor of introducing our special guest, Minister Anita Anand.
Thanks, Mayor Burden, for those words. I'd like to take a moment to say Happy International Women's Week and welcome to Women Who Inspire. This is a speaker series designed to spotlight women in our local community who inspire us by their leadership and achievements. Before we get underway, I'd like to thank my colleagues for joining us tonight. We have MP Pam Demoff with us, Councillors Giddings, Haslett Thiel, Robertson, and Sandu from Oakville, Councillor Lisa Kearns and Stottle from Burlington, and Councillor Ali from Milton. International Women's Day has a global following with a shared purpose. This year's theme, Choose to Challenge. We're moving to a very exciting time in history where the world now expects equity, diversion, and inclusion. Gloria Steinem, world-renowned feminist, journalist, and activist, once explained, the story of women's struggle for equality, it belongs to no single feminist, nor to any one organization, but to the collective efforts of all who care about human rights. Over the past year, the COVID-19 pandemic has been the center of our world. In a recent analysis report by the Center for Economic Policy Research and the World Economic Forum suggests countries led by women had systematically and significantly better COVID-19 outcomes, locking down earlier and suffering half as many deaths on average as those led by men. Here at home, we have our own women pandemic heroes, from our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, to Minister of Health, Patty Hajdu, to Oakville's own Minister of Public Services and Procurement, Anita Anand. These women have played a pivotal role in Canada's response to the pandemic. And the same is true of our health officials. Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Teresa Tam, is a medical doctor and infectious disease specialist with over 50 published papers on topics ranging from influenza outbreaks to SARS. The steady hand and balanced approach to the pandemic has won Dr. Bonnie Henry, the provincial health officer for British Columbia, accolades and even her own fan club. Here in Halton, we continue to depend on our medical officer of health, Dr. Hamida Magani, to lead our region through what we hope are the final stages of the pandemic. When we choose to seek out and celebrate women's achievements, we help create an inclusive world. Our guest today is a woman who has shown us all how to rise to a challenge. Oakville MP Minister Anita Anand is a lawyer and former law professor who entered politics after 25 years of work as a legal academic, employed most recently as a professor of law at the University of Toronto. Shortly after being elected as Member of Parliament in 2019, Minister Anand was appointed to serve Canadians as Minister of Public Services and Procurement. In less than a year, COVID-19 arrived, and with it came the life-saving search for masks, ventilators, testing swabs, and of course, vaccines. Minister Anand came to the forefront of that search and remains front and center today. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome Minister Anita Anand.
Well, hi, everyone, and it's just so wonderful to be here. Rob, thank you so much for that wonderful land acknowledgement, and I too would like to acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations for being stewards of this territory. I'd like to acknowledge a few other people as well. My colleague in the House of Commons, Parliamentary Secretary Pam Demoff. I can't see you, Pam, but I feel you as always in our work in government. And thank you for being such a wonderful partner. And of course, Mayor Burton and Wendy, it's great to see you virtually. I'm sure we're going to be getting back to in-person events sometime soon. So I really look forward to that as well. And all of the town councillors from across Halton, as well as I believe there are some trustees here as well. I just wanted to say hello. Thank you for coming. And Councillor Pavan Parmar, thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. I'm so honored to be here with you, and hopefully we'll leave lots of time for questions and discussion because, of course, as you said, there's so much on Canadians' minds in terms of our government's response to the pandemic. And I'd just like to welcome everybody else who is attending tonight in honor of International Women's Day and Week. It's such an important time of year especially as we are also on March 11th, the 1 year anniversary of the declaration of the pandemic. And I think we all have had some reflections about where were we last year at this time? What were we doing? And did we know what was in front of us? And I think that's really a good place for us to begin the discussion tonight. I'm going to try to give you a mix of what brought me to uh, this day, March 11th, 2021, and also a sense of my commitment to diversity and inclusion and the importance of maintaining a commitment to these ideals, regardless of the time or place that we each find ourselves in. This is a daily, I think, pledge that we make to ensure that we are advancing the cause of women and diversity in our society writ large. And once we do that, once we commit ourselves to that goal and principle, regardless of our profession and daily activities, I think we will all be together making progress towards a better Canadian society. That sounds vague, perhaps, but hopefully through this evening, I'll give you some more information about how I personally strive to achieve the goals of equity, diversity, inclusion every day, and how I try to really emulate those goals, especially for my own daughters and son, actually, as I think this is a global endeavor. It doesn't just involve women, it involves men as well. So let me start with why I entered politics in the first place. And I think many of the elected officials here will be able to resonate with this ideal, and that is because I believe that we all seek a society that is caring and compassionate where no one is left behind. That is something I said in 2019 when I was running, and I continue to believe that even as we are in a race for vaccines, in a race for PPE, it's about ensuring that we are creating and maintaining a society where no one is left behind. And I believe that the institutions that govern our society, whether it is the actual Parliament of Canada or the legislature of our province, the municipal town council, our hospitals, our schools, our universities, I believe that the leadership in those institutions should reflect the demographic composition of our society. And so that was essentially what motivated me to run, that I wanted to make sure that I was putting my best foot forward to create a Canadian society that was truly representative of the many communities that comprise Canada, this amazing country. And as women, we lead by example. We are role models. But as I said at the outset, I think that this is not just a woman's struggle. This is a universal struggle. And so I routinely have conversations with my own spouse about the demographic composition of his place of employ, and how many women are in upper management, and are those women only in human resources or other sectors, and aspects of the organization. And I think that just having that conversation around the kitchen table with your children, with your relatives, is also important to further our own individual commitment to the goals of equality and diversity and inclusion. And as I said, sometimes change is incremental, but many, many incremental changes will make a large communal difference together. And so even just having this conversation tonight, I think, is extremely important. So before I became a member of parliament, as Councillor Pavan Parmar just said, I was teaching in the university and I was involved in corporate governance research and securities law research. And I focused a lot on diversity in boards of directors. And I particular wanted to do an empirical study of showing how many visible minorities and women actually are on the boards of Canada's largest companies. And I found, like other studies, that about 16 to 17% of our boards in Canada are comprised of women in terms of the complement, women to men. But in terms of visible minority representation, the stat was much lower, 4% alone, right, of individuals on boards were of visible minority or racialized minority status. And that just is an indicator, and this was 4 or 5 years ago, this study was done, but that's just an indicator that there are many, many, many mountains to climb before we are going to have a situation where the institutions of our society reflect the demographic composition, the diversity of Canadian society. Now, moving on to the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that women have borne the brunt of this pandemic. Mothers, women in low income jobs, essential workers, frontline healthcare workers have experienced more stress, more burden, more onus of carrying this pandemic, and many of them have been unable to return to work. They've lost their hard won gains that women as a whole have made up over the last decades. And so, as you probably have heard in the news, many women, myself included, are referring to the current economic situation as a she-cession, not only a recession. And we as a government, including my colleagues, Minister Freeland and Minister Haidu and Minister Monsef, have committed to ensuring that we are working together to ensure that women aren't left behind during and after this pandemic. And in our fall economic statement, for example, the Government of Canada reiterated its commitment to ensure an inclusive feminist recovery. And in our fall economic statement, we reiterated that, as I said, as well as in many events this week alone, where we are going to continue to work to ensure that women aren't left behind. So we have formed a task force on women in the economy to harness the best ideas from a diverse group of experts in this task force to advise us as a government on the best steps forward to ensure that women are not left behind. Now, equality of opportunity is a foundation, but is it enough? Should we be doing more to create and ensure that women aren't left behind and that other minority groups, Black entrepreneurs and Indigenous women and peoples are not left behind? And as a minister of public services and procurement, what I have said to my department is if there is a minister that cares about diversity, this is your minister. I want to make sure that before I leave this ministry, I have done everything I can to diversify federal supply chains and to ensure that women, LGBTQ+, Black entrepreneurs, Indigenous peoples have the opportunity to participate in federal procurements. And so while we've been procuring PPE and vaccines, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to get into this, Pavan, I've also said, what can we do to ensure that while we're procuring masks, we can also ensure that Indigenous communities and businesses have the ability to participate in our procurement. So we ran specific competitions just for the Indigenous communities, Indigenous-led businesses. And recently we launched 10 Black pilot projects for Black entrepreneurs alone. And it's my view that we need to make sure that we are offering these opportunities to diverse groups in our society so that when we look at our economy in the medium to long term, because this is not going to happen overnight, we see ourselves. We see that this is an economy that reflects the reality of Canadian society. And finally, I just want to say that on this International Women's Day and week, I think so much of my family. I think about my mother, who taught me and my sisters so much about striving to do good work and to be positive role models. I think about my sisters who are pursuing their own professions and their desire to make a difference. And I think at the end of the day, it's really not about any one leader or minister or counselor, even. It's really about all of us working together to ensure that the society that we leave behind is better than the one we participated in. Whether we're talking about racialized communities, women, um, our children as a whole, ensuring a resilient and green economy, that is, in my view, an overarching goal. Let's leave our society better off than when we found it. So, with that, I will take any questions or comments, and including any about vaccines, because I know there are lots. But I decided deliberately not to mention vaccines in my speech in any substantive way because A, I talk about vaccines all day, but B, I wanted to focus on women and the importance of diversity and inclusion in our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That was great. And you're right. We have had an influx of questions around the vaccine rollout. So I think also we should focus on the Women's International Women's Day questions, but perhaps we can answer some of the vaccine questions and get that out of the way and then refocus. So the theme of the questions coming in really is around how is the rollout coming along? What has been the biggest challenge of the rollout? And when do you expect everyone will be vaccinated by?
So, thanks for the question. Let me just give you the numbers of deliveries that are coming into the country from approved suppliers. So we have 8 million vaccines that will be here prior to the end of March. We have 36.5 million vaccines that will be here prior to the end of June. And then prior to the end of September, 117.9 million vaccines from approved suppliers. And so we are going to see a very steep ramp up of vaccines coming into the country. And you're already seeing this actually with about 1 million vaccines coming into the country per week. And that's just going to increase, especially in the spring, in April, May, and June. In terms of everybody being vaccinated, that's not just a federal government issue. So my role is to bring the vaccines into Canada, and then we provide the vaccines to the provinces and territories. And of course, they're responsible under our Constitution for the administration of healthcare, and they're responsible for getting the shots into the arms. And that's why I'm unable to say with any exact specific moment in time when everybody will be vaccinated, but I can tell you that the influx of vaccines prior to the end of the summer will be sufficient to ensure that all Canadians are vaccinated.
There's also a follow-up question to that on whether people, the mass public, will have the option to choose which vaccine they get.
So again, and perhaps thankfully, as Minister of Public Services and Procurement, I am buying the vaccines. right, on the advice of the Vaccine Task Force and the Public Health Agency of Canada. And all along in our procurements, we have taken the advice of the scientists and the experts in terms of whether we should focus on mRNA procurements, viral vector procurements, or protein subunit vaccines. And thankfully, we have been able to land 7 agreements for vaccines for up to about 400 million vaccines. When it comes to the precise vaccine that is administered and whether an individual has choice, the regulatory body of Health Canada is saying that any vaccine that has been approved is a good vaccine for Canadians. And that's the vaccine that you should take. So we have 4 approved vaccines. We have Moderna and Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca. And so the advice is to take whatever you can get, essentially, in terms of a vaccine. Now, from a provincial perspective, you do have the ability to sign up for vaccines at pharmacies. So to some extent, it appears that you have some choice as to whether to get the vaccine or not. But at this point, I'm not sure if there's really an opportunity to choose, and it's the recommendation of our scientists of Health Canada that you should take whatever you can get in terms of a vaccine.
Thank you. Thanks. That was a great answer. And 2 other questions that have come in are, how long do you expect social distancing and masking to remain in place? And how long will PPE remain a priority for you?
Well, let me start with PPE first, because that's one of my areas of expertise. We began this pandemic, of course, procuring PPE, and we procured 2.7 billion items of PPE and distributed 1.4 billion items out to provinces and territories. And so we're continuing. This is what I call the first mountain of the pandemic, was the procuring of PPE, and it was very intense in that first wave, climbing that first mountain to ensure that we had the PPE not just procured internationally, but produced domestically. So now all of our 40% of our PPE contracts by dollar value are with Canadian suppliers. So Canadian businesses from across the country stepped up to ensure that we would never again be in a situation where we needed PPE. And in terms of how long we will need PPE for, that of course is a question for our public health authorities. I suspect that we will be wearing masks for some time. The advice of the public health experts is that the vaccine is not a silver bullet, and that we're going to need to maintain our social distancing and our mask wearing. Now, having said that, COVID has been very difficult for us, and we've all adopted new practices such as wearing masks and staying home. My preference is to work at home, so in a very unexpected way, I've been able to do that. And I'm sure many of your listeners and people here enjoy being at home as well. Having said that, I think we all want to resume our life as usual, and hopefully we will be able to do that soon.
Thank you. So I think that does get the vaccine questions out of the way. So we'll switch gears a little bit. One of the first questions that come in is, thank you so much for sharing with us today. My question, as a young woman potentially interested in pursuing politics, how do you handle criticism from the public?
Well, that's a very good question. And I will say that many women with whom I speak tell me that that is the main reason they don't want to go into politics, that they don't want the criticism of the press or in the House of Commons or whatever body the person is seeking election to. And I will say that I have very strong convictions about my internal principles and what I believe is right. I also believe that we have to stay true to our own ideals. And one of my ideals is I should pull it out here, is in the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Indian Hindu religious book. And in chapter 2 of this book, there's just one paragraph which I find fairly representative of what I believe and motivates me to keep going. And that paragraph is, fall not into degrading weakness, for this becomes not a person who is a person. Throw off this ignoble discouragement and arise like a fire that burns all before it. So, in other words, try to cut through the noise and the criticism. And if you have an ideal and a responsibility, continue to pursue it every day with conviction. And that's what I try to do. And that's essentially what I tell people who speak to me about whether they should go into politics. We need more women in political life. We need more racialized minorities in political life. And I believe that our discourse will continue to improve the more representative of our society, our institutions are of the society in which we live.
Thank you. So there is a second question. As a female and POC living in Oakville, do you find that you are more challenged, not just by gender, but also by race? How can we increase role modeling for females and the BIPOC community in Halton?
This person has such great questions. Is this the same person asking both these questions? Because they're both excellent.
This person also had a similar question, but
that's great. Okay, so let me just speak personally about my experiences. When I first was thinking about running, many people raised the possibility that I wouldn't get elected in Oakville because I'm racialized. And I don't know, Councillor Parmar, if you have also heard that, but that did cause me to pause and think about whether I wanted to run in Oakville. And I think that hesitation is probably representative of others. And I would be interested to hear from others about their experiences as women and as visible minorities. But I said to myself that we will never know unless we try. And I wanted to believe in the goodness of our community, and as well as my legitimacy as a candidate, and thought to myself, I will give it a shot and see if this community has faith in me to represent them. And that's basically how I went about my decision making. But I'll say that the decision to run for office is fraught with many, many questions, and that's one of them. I think you have to really, truly figure out if you're at that point in your life where you want to commit yourself wholly to a new and different responsibility of service. Because there is no other job, in my view, like this one, like being an elected official. And my kids often tease me and tell me I'm not athletic. And I say, you know, I'm the only one playing a team sport every single day. And if nothing else, politics is a team sport. You are really working together with your compatriots, with your colleagues with whom you've been elected to achieve results. And so everything we've done in procurement and across government during this pandemic has been a result of a team effort. And my kids still don't think I'm athletic, but I do believe that, you know, politics is a team sport.
Thank you. And you're right. Actually, this question was posed to me as well, and I can certainly relate to your experience. And, you know, I really like the answer that you gave. And I think that in terms of role modeling for women and the BIPOC community. I think it's events like this and, spotlighting and showcasing racialized community members that are in positions of leadership, women, and really as a community working together to open doors and to give equal access and opportunity to our community members. And, it really is a shared goal.
Well, Pavan, I actually, when you invited me to do this, I was thinking to myself, Pavan should do it.
Oh,
She's great. Let's hold an event where Pavan can speak. So I'll have to do that.
So the next question is, how did the pandemic change the role you set out to do when you were elected as an MP and appointed as Minister of Public Services and Procurement in 2019?
This actually, we should make this one kind of funny, right? Because it is kind of funny that if you look at it, here I am just elected, fairly surprised to be elected in the first place as member of parliament, and then again surprised to be appointed to cabinet. And then within months of 2020, leading federal procurements in the area of the product that Canada needed the most, PPE. And then moving on to rapid test kits, we procured 40 million rapid test kits and distributed over 20 million to provinces to date. And then moving on to vaccines, entered into 7 agreements with leading vaccine manufacturers for a total of up to 400 million doses, the largest number of doses per capita of any country in the world. We had Moderna in this country well before most countries. We had Pfizer in this country well before other countries, entered into those agreements before most other countries. And so my role kind of went from very steady and kind of involved with the aspects of the portfolio that one would expect. Shipbuilding was huge, is huge. Our future fighter jet procurements, that's another large item in our portfolio. Managing and the real estate for Parliament Hill and overseeing the National Capital Region. Those are other aspects of the portfolio. So I was remembering today, because some people have been asking me this question, I was testifying at PROC, one of our committees of the House of Commons. And that was a big deal because it was my first testimony and I was talking about the renovations to Center Block. Shortly after that appearance, it was just straight into the pandemic, and it was 24/7 procurements. And you'll remember everybody wanted N95 masks. Everybody needed gowns and gloves. And so we were really, really focused to aggressively put in place these long-term contracts to ensure we were ready as a country for a second or third wave. So my role kind of went from behind the scenes as a minister, working on the business of government, such as the pay system and the Center Block renovations, and overseeing the National Capital Region. Those are items that don't make the front pages every day, and I was really glad to be in such a role. The media is not an area that I gravitate towards, so you may think differently these days, to being front and center in terms of what we were doing in our government. But again, it's a whole of government approach. It is not just one person. I'm heading up a ministry that has, 20,000 employees. It's a team effort right across the board, and MP Demoff will attest to this, I'm sure, right? Her ministry is so committed to clean drinking water and the boiled water advisories, and that is just as important as all the work that we are doing at PSPC. So as I say, we've got multiple departments all working in tandem to keep delivering for Canadians.
Thanks. Thank you. I mean, yeah, I can see how you humor it now because it certainly wasn't anything that you could have ever
Well,
predicted.
I mean, I'll just say that anecdotally, the first few weeks of being appointed and being elected were just, it was a one surprise after another, and you can only imagine it was kind of like Christmas. I was constantly writing in my journal, and today I did, and it was a completely different experience, right? Whether it was a cabinet retreat or uh, meeting my fellow caucus members, and I'm just kind of reflecting on the times when we could all gather together and meet people in person, and I can't wait to get back to that.
Same here. I think everybody feels that way. So this is a good one. From my 13-year-old daughter, what's the one thing that people don't know about the job that makes you love working in government? Oh, I think you've accidentally, yeah.
Um, well, my long hesitation is making it somewhat awkward to answer the question. Um, I will say the best thing about working in government is the people that I'm working with. From our Halton MPs, we're very close as a group, to the broader Ontario caucus, to our Canadian caucus, to cabinet, and working closely with our prime minister. It has been an honor of a lifetime to meet such an incredible group of people. And indeed, one of the things that I thought when I was at the University of Toronto was I love my colleagues and loved my colleagues there very, very much. But I did feel a bit like there's a big bad world out there that I'm not going to experience. And I worried that I would get to be kind of knitting in my rocking chair without having experienced a broader piece of professional life that I envisioned for myself. And indeed, meeting great people and multiple different types of people from all areas of Canada has been just the honor of a lifetime. And I'm sure Pam will attest that we have an incredible caucus, and I feel so blessed.
And I can say actually the same that when as being a new counselor in my first term, I always get, hey, how's it going? How are you liking it? And, I always respond, I have really great colleagues and, it has been challenging in the beginning because you're new and you're learning the role. But we have such great leadership at the town, the mayor and my colleagues, and everybody's always willing to help. So certainly that's great. That's a great environment to work in, and I love that. But I also love the engagement with the community. I recall during door knocking, I would often come across younger families that were kind of like, oh, I don't vote in the municipal election, or didn't even know it was coming up and didn't really know much about municipal issues. So now when I have a resident reach out about waste management or recycling or how do I do this, it's really satisfying to know that, yes, people are engaging and that our everyday work that we're putting in is impacting the community in a positive way. So it's always great to
Mhm.
get that type of feedback. So we actually have a question for the mayor as well.
Yay!
So I think, Rob, if you wanted to unmute yourself there. The question is, how has Oakville progressed when it comes to gender equality? I think we might be having some,
He's frozen.
yeah.
Frozen has taken on a new meaning
Yeah.
in Zoom calls. Can you hear us, Rob?
Okay, maybe we'll come back to him.
Wait, are you hearing me now?
Oh, good, right on the time, yes.
Well, apparently it's possible to mute yourself twice, and I found the way accidentally. So you asked a very good question, and there's a very good story by way of an answer. And I would start that by sharing with you a message from the acting mayor of Oakville for the next 3 months, and that would be Councillor Natalia Lischina. And she writes, she couldn't be here tonight because she's a very busy woman. She's on another board that's meeting at the same time, and you know, she has a responsible role there, so she had to, you know, she had to do her duty. Before she ever heard me talk about get engaged in the activity of your community, she figured that out by herself, and she is highly engaged in our community, as many of our members of council are. Anyway, she writes, "Happy International Women's Day this week. I'm sorry I could not attend tonight, but wanted to send a little note to say that I find myself so fortunate to be in the company of so many talented, brilliant, kind, and compassionate women who contribute so much to the fabric of our town each and every day. IWD provides an opportunity to reflect and give thanks to the women before us who took the difficult steps to make it possible for our shoes to walk an easier path. And then that, she says, devolves another responsibility on our generation to pay it forward and continue to build the path for the next generation so that they can soar to new heights." And she thanks you, Councillor Parmer, and me for celebrating women who inspire tonight. And the rest of the question is, the rest of the story is, it's now almost, but not quite, 3 years since the last municipal election. Before the last municipal election, about 15% of the Oakville Council was composed of women. And I'd like to acknowledge, as you already did, Burlington Councillor Lisa Kearns, who's here, because before the last municipal election, it was about 15% of that council that was women. And today it's more than 40%. In Burlington, they have 3 members of council who are women, and they also have, and the mayor is a woman. Now, Oakville had a woman mayor long before who served with distinction and popularity for 18 years. So, you know, Oakville has no lessons to learn about women as mayor. And in Oakville's case, we now have 6 women on council. There's Natalia and Kathy Duddock, who also couldn't be here, but there's yourself and Beth Robertson and Jasminder Sandhu, who is here, and Janet Haslett-Thiel, who I believe is here as well. And all of you are, I think I'm safe to say, a force to be reckoned with on our council. I hope you have I have no idea, you've never complained to me, but I hope you have no complaints about the behavior of the men on council. From my chair at the center, it appears to me that you've been well respected. And there's been another change in Oakville since I became mayor. When I became mayor, almost all of the commissioners, that is to say the executives of the town, because the mayor and councillor, we make policy. We're like the board of directors. The executives who execute the plans of the council, they're the ones with the power and authority, if you will, and they answer to council. And when I became mayor, most of them were men, and now most of them are women. In fact, of all our commissioners, only one is a man, and he's a recent hire. And I won't make a joke about that before I get myself in trouble, but I have noticed that he's on very good behavior too, and I hope it stays that way. So voters in Oakville 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, made a big change. And we, who were on council for the last 15 years, we made some pretty extraordinary changes too.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. So the next question is, As a working mother growing her career, what challenges did you face and how did you balance your work-home lives?
Well, I'm sure there are lots of mothers, working mothers, who are listening and have very similar, perhaps different experiences, but I'll just say that it is a juggling act to some extent when you're working full time and you have children. I have 4 kids under the age of 24. And so now they're pretty self-sufficient. But when I first started, uh, teaching as a professor, I had 4 kids under the age of 5. And so it was a challenge, that is for sure. But I always had my mother in the back of my mind, and she always said to us that you have to be able to support yourself. So choose a job that you will be able to support yourself no matter what happens in your life, because you never know when you're going to need to do that. And so she always pushed me to not just have kids, but to keep my profession going. So there are times, and I'm sure all working women feel this, where you just go, I can't do this anymore. This is too hard. I've got to stay home, because you want to be everywhere, but really you just can't. So I definitely had those moments. But I'm really glad that I stuck it out, because I was able to keep doing things that I love. And now my kids, as I said, are largely grown up, and I'm glad that I fostered a career through those years so that I could continue to work, because I really love working. So I think at the end of the day, you have to do what you love. And I also think in a community of like Oakville, you see women of all different types, lots of working women, lots of women who choosing to work in the home. And what I loved about being, or when my kids were in grade school, was that you got to meet all of these different parents. And those are some of my closest friends now. And I can remember that lots of them helped me out when I had to take the GO train into Toronto and my nanny called in sick and I had nowhere to turn with my kids. And lots of moms would say, I'll take them. And I think that's what is so beautiful about Oakville, that we have an incredibly generous and giving community where people really step up to help their neighbors. And I think that's really the story of towns and cities across the country, where Canadians, they really support each other. And I think we've seen that in spades through the pandemic.
I mean, I think I am where you started off. I have two.
Well, Pavan, could I just mention that Councillor Beth Robertson is with us too, and I'm pretty sure in my effort to name everybody, I left her out. So, and she had a long career as a very popular high school teacher in our town. So, anytime we need help of that kind, she's there for us too. So, I think most people in Oakville are very proud of their council. Very constructive and cooperative council that really likes to work together. And I thank you very much for letting me correct my faux pas.
Oh, no worries. I was just going to touch on the balancing part of, being a working mom. And I think Minister Anand, you really identified it by having a support system. I mean, sometimes, people see a public figure or a working mom and thinking, how does she do it all? And really, you have that support system, whether it's your neighbors, your family, your spouse, somebody there to really help you along the way. One thing I enjoy about council, pre-pandemic, was that there's so many great events in Oakville and Halton. And, as a counselor, one of our roles is to attend these events and be with our residents. And I find I can take my kids everywhere with me. And I remember talking to Regional Chair Gary Carr before I decided to run for council. And I said, you know, are you sure? My son's only 6 months. Like, what do you think? It's going to be too challenging. And he said, take him with you. Take your kids where, you know, where you can in the community, and take them out to events. And, you know, that's really a great part of being involved in municipal politics and having that opportunity. But certainly, you know, as we talked about, every mom, every working mom, it's a juggling act, and, you know, things just fall into place and you figure out a routine that works best for you. So there is a few more questions. We are running out of time, and there's so many coming in. So I'm apologizing in advance if your question doesn't get answered tonight, but we'll certainly host more of these in the future. So what advice do you have for young women seeking a career in politics?
Well, it's a great question. And as I said, I want to start with the point that we need more women in politics, and we need more racialized women, BIPOC women in politics as well. We are very broad Canadian society, and we need our institutions to reflect the diversity of our society. Having said that, in terms of advice, I started by chatting with people who had already been elected. Rob can remember a few coffees that we had downtown Oakville when I was thinking about running. I talked to people who had been politicians who and had left political life. I talked to people who had ran but had not been successful in elections. I talked to people who worked in the Liberal Party. I talked to people who were experts in fundraising, because when you run, one large portion of what you do is not only serve the public, but you have to fundraise to enable that, ensure that you can run a campaign, because it's expensive. And so I really did I use it quotes, research, just because it's not the type of research I usually do, but research in terms of speaking with as many people as possible. That was one part of it. And then the other part of it is I tried to understand the rules relating to running, because there are kind of rules to be nominated, and the rules to run in an election, and an application process that you have to go through to be approved as a candidate. So I tried to understand that process by reading material. So if you're thinking of running, come and talk to me, and I'll give you some more details about the types of things that I did. But generally speaking, that's what I did. And I will say that, again, no amount of research is going to be able to allow you the comfort that you need to feel in order to make a decision to run. That's an internal decision, and it's separate from the information seeking about what running entails. And it's really difficult. And I will say that for many, many months, I wasn't sure if it was the right decision for me, because I had a career, long-standing career at the universities that I worked at, that I was really happy at. And I think I'm still assessing how much I'm enjoying my career, and how glad I am that I made this change. But I really don't have a lot of time for that reflection right now, because as I mentioned, the entire country wants vaccines, and I've got to get them here as soon as possible. And that's my main focus each and every day, is to speak with suppliers, move up deliveries. And luckily, last week, you may have heard that we were able to increase the Pfizer deliveries to Canada by 1.5 million. So we are getting 8 million doses prior to the end of March, as opposed to the previous 6 million. Those are the types of things I'm working on every day. And I expect once the pandemic is over, I'll have more time for reflection, and hopefully I have my journal here somewhere. I keep it by my desk so that if I ever get a chance during the day, I can just jot a few things down that will jog my memory. And when time permits, I'll go back and fill in the blanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think another important piece of that is to get involved in your community as well, you know, as much as you can. And the mayor spoke to it in the beginning. We have a ton of community groups.
That is such a good point. Both, I agree with the mayor and Councillor Parma on that one. So the importance of that point, I think, and the mayor said this at the beginning, is that there are so many ways to get involved in the community in Oakville, so many organizations.
Yeah.
And so for me, because I had a corporate governance background, I started serving on some volunteer boards. But there are ways to contribute by volunteering with sports teams or other organizations or in schools, and the list goes on and on. So I couldn't agree more. Volunteering at a local level is a really, I mean, it serves the community, but it also allows you to gain more of an understanding about what service in your community means. It's a really good point.
Thank you. Did you, Minister or Mayor Burton, want to offer any closing remarks? We're just at the end of our time here today.
Well, you know, to the young person who was asking about how to, you know, about getting into politics, we had a member of parliament, Bonnie Brown, for many years in the 90s. And I met her before I decided to get into politics. And I asked her about getting into politics, and she gave me this one piece of advice that was very similar to what I said in my opening remarks. She said, get involved in a political party, something that has a campaign, and work on somebody's campaign so you can see up close and dirty what it's really like, and then you'll know whether you can stand it or not. And if you're any good at it, you can go ahead. And if you're not, you can spare everybody your efforts. And I thought that was very charming. I've always loved Bonnie's sense of humor. And, you know, she was a real pioneer in terms of women in politics and, you know, a woman member of parliament from Oakville. So maybe it's appropriate to put a little coda on my remarks by invoking Bonnie.
Absolutely. And that's great advice. Well, I mean, I just want to take a few minutes to thank our guest, Minister Anita Anand. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you today. And I know that you have inspired women of all ages through your tireless work and commitment. I also want to offer our thanks to Your TV Oakville Burlington and Channel Y by Y Media Group for helping us to present this event. And we hope that everybody here will join us in the future for our next Women Who Inspire event. Please stay tuned. We'll post details when that's planned. And thank you for coming out tonight and for the wonderful questions. And thank you to you, Minister Anand. I mean, we know how busy you are, so we really, truly appreciate you, you know, taking the time to join us tonight and having this chat with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Councillor Parma, and thank you, Mayor Burton and Wendy, for being here too with us. And as I said, so many people who chose to give up their time to have this discussion. And I really look forward to the time where we can see each other in person and have more of these types of conversations. We really need to continue to voice our commitment to these goals in order to move them ahead. So thanks again for having me, and onwards and upwards. Let's keep going.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Councillor. And thank you to each of you for participating tonight. It was great being with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye now.